So we just discussed PepsiCo's long-term financial plan, right? Our answer was that PepsiCo could probably finance the expansion using internal funds, but there are reasons why the company may want to issue new long-term financing, okay? And this is obviously a very important topic in corporate finance. You know, if a company decides that it does need new long-term financing, right? How should you do it? There are many issues to think about here, right? So this is, we call this the capital structure decision, right? So how do companies finance themselves? What kind of securities should they issue, right? And to talk about all of these issues would be beyond the scope of this module, okay? This is something that we're not going to cover so much in this course, but I just want to highlight a few of the key issues that the company would need to consider, okay? So just for completeness, let's talk about a few of the issues that PepsiCo would need to consider if it does decide to issue new external funds, okay? So the first issue to consider is which source of financing to use, right? So yes, you need, for example, $3 billion of cash, let's say. There are many ways you can raise this money, right? You can raise the money by issuing new stock. You can raise the money by issuing a bond, or you can go to a bank and borrow the money, right? So there are many factors that a chief financial officer would need to think about here, including taxes, liquidity, how much leverage you have. Remember, we talked about leverage in Module 1. Now we know how to measure how levered the company is. We have to think about market conditions, right? What do interest rates look like, risk, many other considerations, okay? Like I said, in this course, we don't have the room to talk about capital structure in that detail, okay? But this is something that we will cover in a future course. If you're interested, there will be a second corporate finance course that we're going to do where we're going to be talking about this, okay? Anyway, for us at this point, let's say that PepsiCo decides to issue a bond, okay? Suppose you consider all of this and you're going to raise the money by issuing a bond, okay? First question to think about, when should you do it, right? We have our financial planning model. We know that PepsiCo is not going to need the money until 2016, okay? So it's not, your cash is going to stay constant. There's no need to get any new financing until that year. So you might think that it may be better for PepsiCo to just wait, right? Just sit and wait until 2016 comes and then you issue the bond, right? Of course, the advantage of that is that PepsiCo won't have to pay any interest, right? So if you don't issue that until 2016, you're not going to pay any interest on that, okay? The disadvantage, which may be less clear, right, is that you're never sure what market conditions will be in 2016, right? So it's the future, and we never know what's going to happen. What if, for example, what if we have a new financial crisis, okay? And this actually allows me to talk a little bit about some research that I've done in a paper that I recently wrote with Scott Weisbanner, that was one of the other professors in this specialization actually, right? And some of our co-authors, where we look at corporate debt during the recent financial crisis, right? We had a financial crisis around the world in 2007, from 2007 to 2009. Our paper examines what happens to companies during that time. And a very interesting finding that we have in that paper is that companies that were forced to issue new debt at the height of the financial crisis, right, in 2008, did worse than companies that were in a stronger financial position, okay? So it's a little bit like the situation we are discussing here. PepsiCo is thinking about, should I issue the debt today or should I wait, okay? If you wait, you might end up being in a year where market conditions are really bad. If you are forced to issue debt in that year, you may not be able to issue it, like banks may say no, or you might have to pay a much higher interest rate, okay? An interesting example that we discuss in our paper is the case of Avis and Budget, which are two car rental companies here in the US. They actually operate around the world. And what happened is that before the financial crisis, they were both independent companies. They were competitors, okay? But budget was exactly in the situation that we are describing here. Budget was forced to issue debt in 2008 to refinance some long-term debt that was maturing in that year, while Avis was in a much higher financial position. And if you read the news, if you read the history, what you'll see is that Avis ended up acquiring Budget following the financial crisis. So Budget was actually acquired by Avis partly because it was going through some financial trouble, and it ended up being swallowed by the competitor. Okay, so poor financial management can have very extreme consequences for companies. That's what we show in our research. Okay, so it may not be a good idea. Going back to our PepsiCo example, PepsiCo may actually want to issue the debt today instead of waiting until the future. Okay. The second question is how much, right? Suppose you need to, you decide that you need, let's say, $2 billion, okay, to finance this expansion plan. Should the company borrow exactly $2 billion, right? Again, the advantage is to minimize interest payments, right? If you borrow just what you need, you're going to be paying less interest, but there is a risk as well, right? Think about what could be this risk. It's actually related to what we just discussed. You know, it's this idea, the idea of precaution, right? You know, it may be safer to borrow more. You know, it might sound counterintuitive that having less leverage makes you safer, but when you think about this problem, it may actually be safer to borrow more than $2 billion despite the additional interest. Why is that? You know, we have this forecasting model. Our forecasting model is telling us, yes, we're going to need $2.6 billion, but the forecasting model could be wrong, right? Maybe PepsiCo is going to do worse than what we expect. There might be other expenses. There might be other cash needs, okay? So it actually, you know, PepsiCo's CFO might actually consider whether it's worthwhile to borrow more than what you need, right? Just for precautionary reasons. And we call this precautionary borrowing, okay? And here comes a question. So if you're going to engage in this precautionary borrowing, if you're going to borrow more than you need, what are you going to do with the excess funding, right? So what should PepsiCo do with the cash? The answer is that you have to hold cash, right? So for this excess funding to give you financial security, you can't spend it, okay? You have to hold the cash in the balance sheet. And again, this allows me to talk about some research that I've done where we make precisely this point that holding cash in a sense is economically equivalent to this precautionary borrowing idea, right? A company that decides to hold cash could potentially use that cash to reduce the leverage. One use of the cash is to repay debt, right? So if you decide to hold cash in the balance sheet, in a sense, you're really deciding to have higher leverage as well, right? Or to put it in another way, you know, a company that does precautionary borrowing, that borrows more than what it needs, is going to end up holding more cash, okay? And that might be, despite the higher cost of this financial strategy, it might end up making sense for a company that needs to take precautions against future cash flow shocks, against future liquidity shocks.